Welcome back to Mr. Nightgrim. Tonight I'm taking you deep into 8 chilling cruise ship nightmares, stories of passengers and crew who crossed the gangway and found something waiting that no one could explain. You'll hear about the diver whose surface changed forever, a midnight intercom warning that echoed through the fog, the cabin no guest would spend 2 nights in, and a lifeboat that came back without a soul on board, except for wet footprints. If you're new here, hit subscribe, tap like, and tell me in the comments where in the world are you listening from tonight. Now, let's begin this voyage into the unknown. I'll never forget the day I got the call from Carnival's security office, asking if I could help review footage from the Triumph surveillance system. Not because it was my job, I'm just an IT contractor, not security, but because the ship's head of security, Glenn, sounded off in a way I'd never heard before. There was a nervousness, like he didn't want the conversation on record. "It's about a missing passenger," he said, "but there's something weird about the tapes." I remember that phrase exactly. The Triumph was about halfway through a 7-day Gulf circuit, running its usual course between Galveston and Cozumel. It's a floating city of noise and neon, a place where people go to forget the outside world, not vanish from it. The missing passenger was named Maya, 26, traveling with her parents, sharing a stateroom on Deck 9. She'd been on board for 3 days, and by every account she'd been having a good time. Cocktails at the Lido bar, dancing in the lounge, group photos by the pool with those ridiculous plastic lees. The kind of memories you want to print and hang on your fridge. She went missing the night of the second formal dinner. Her parents told security she'd left the bar around 11:40 p.m., laughing, a little tipsy but steady, still in her sparkly blue dress and sandals. She said she was heading back to the cabin to change her shoes. She never arrived. Security started their usual protocol. They checked the ship's manifests, passenger logs, even the medical station. Nothing. The ocean was calm, the weather clear, and the ship's external rail cameras never showed anyone going overboard. So Glenn's team turned to the internal cameras. Here's sips where it got strange. The first camera caught Maya leaving the aft bar, turning left into the starboard hallway, Deck 9, Section C. You can see her distinctly. The blue dress, the way she fiddles with her phone in one hand and waves off some unseen joke with the other. She looks completely normal, just another young woman winding down her night. She walks down the hallway, past cabin doors, a housekeeper's cart, a group of 3 men heading the other way. She never seems to notice them, and they don't react to her at all. She passes under a camera mounted by the vending alcove, and then nothing. There are 6 more cameras covering the stretch between the bar and her cabin. Every angle, every door, every fire exit. She should appear on at least 3 of them before reaching her room. We rewound and watched each feed together, minute by minute, zooming in and slowing down, but Maya never appears again. Not even a blur. It's as if she walked off the edge of the footage and into a different world. I kept going back to that moment in the hallway. The last time we saw her, did she double back? Did she duck into a side door? We checked everything. The laundry closet was locked, the supply rooms untouched. No one on her deck reported any strange noises, arguments, or alarms. The housekeeper swore she saw a young lady in blue walk past her cart, humming to herself. But when asked if she heard a cabin door open or close, she just shook her head. "No doors, sir. Just the humming." At some point during the second review, Glenn paused the footage and rewound 5 seconds. "Watch the wall behind her," he said. I stared. Maya passed a patch of wallpaper with a faded palm tree motif. For half a second as she walked, the reflection in the brass light sconce seemed wrong. There was a shadow that trailed after her, out of sync with the rest of her body. It almost looked like a second pair of feet, flickering along the carpet for a few steps before vanishing. I thought it was a compression artifact, a glitch, but every time we played it back, there it was. The shadow, the wrong movement, a ripple behind her like heat distortion. I started to feel sick. I don't scare easy, but there's something about watching a person vanish in real time that shakes you up. You expect to see a jump cut, or for someone to step off screen. But Maya was just erased. Glenn kept the room cold, the AC rattling overhead, and I felt sweat prickle behind my knees anyway. We cross-checked the bar receipts, the door logs, every RFID swipe in the system. Maya's keycard never opened her cabin that night. Her phone pinged the ship's Wi-Fi once at 11:42, then went silent. Her family stayed up all night, hoping she'd stagger back in. By sunrise, every crew member was searching. It's easy to think of a cruise ship as safe, all that steel and routine and smiling staff. But by noon, rumors had started. Someone said Maya had a secret boyfriend among the crew. Someone else swore they heard crying on the lower decks at 2 a.m. We checked every claim, nothing matched up. The captain ordered a full sweep, even holding the ship offshore for 2 extra hours to scan the water. The lifeboats were all accounted for. No one saw Maya, no one, except that silent shadow on the hallway wall. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about that reflection, how it almost looked like it was trying to hold her back, like a set of hands outstretched and then withdrawn. I kept replaying the footage in my head, the way the lights flickered as she walked, how her face seemed to tense for a split second before the camera lost her for good. Day 2 after Maya vanished, the atmosphere on the ship changed. People grew quieter, glancing over their shoulders in the corridors, checking the time every few minutes. Some avoided Deck 9 altogether, whispering about bad luck and dark omens. Her parents spent every waking hour with the officers, begging them to check the cameras one more time, to page the entire crew, to tear the place apart if they had to. I sat in the security room with Glenn, reviewing the system logs for any sign of tampering. But the feeds were untouched, timestamps matching down to the second, no edits or missing hours. I even went down myself, walking that same hallway at 11:40 p.m., retracing Maya's steps. The air was colder than usual, artificial, dry, but somehow heavy. Every sound echoed a little too long, the hum of the overhead lights, the whir of the laundry cart, the soft slap of my own shoes on the carpet. It all felt wrong, as if the hallway was waiting for something to happen. Halfway to her cabin, I paused by the wall where Maya's reflection had warped in the footage. The sconce flickered, just like in the video. I stared at my own shadow, watching for any glitch, any strange movement. My skin prickled, but nothing happened. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I turned back, pretending I had a reason to check the vending machines. The investigation spread. Coast Guard officers came aboard at the next port, combing through the logs, grilling the crew. The rumor mill exploded. Everything from kidnapping to suicide to some cover-up by security. But there was nothing. No ransom note. No evidence of foul play. Maya's phone, keycard, passport, all untouched in her cabin. It was as if she'd simply walked out of the world. I stayed up late that night, drinking cheap coffee in the galley with a handful of crew. One, a Filipino night steward named Arnold, asked me quietly, "You see footage of the girl?" I nodded, thinking he was going to repeat the same theories. But Arnold just leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Last year, other girl disappeared too. Same deck. Security find nothing. Only," he paused, tracing a shape in the condensation on his cup. "Only cold spot by cabin 9340. Even when ship is hot. Like someone is standing there but you cannot see them." I wanted to laugh it off. I told myself it was just fear and grief. People inventing stories to make sense of the impossible. But later, as I passed that same stretch of hallway, I noticed the temperature drop again, a wave of cold, so sudden I could see my breath fog for a moment. I pressed my palm against the wallpaper, half expecting it to burn, but it felt clammy, almost moist. I jerked my hand away and hurried down the hall, not daring to look back at the sconce. A day later, security flagged something else. The group of 3 men who passed Maya on camera. Glenn and I isolated the footage, watching them walk in the opposite direction just a few seconds after Maya vanished. None of them looked at her. They never paused, never turned their heads. But zooming in, I saw goosebumps raised on the forearm of the man in the middle, even under the thin linen of his sleeve. When he reached the place where Maya had disappeared, he shivered, wrapping his arms tight around his body, then glanced behind him as if he'd heard a voice. But there was no sound, just that silent hallway and the flicker of light. The cruise ended 2 days later, docked in Galveston under a gray, washed-out sky. Maya's family disembarked, pale and hollow-eyed, surrounded by security officers and staff with forced frozen smiles. There were press releases, promises of ongoing investigation, even a reward posted in the port terminal. But in my gut, I knew no amount of searching would bring Maya back. Not really. A week after returning home, Glenn called me. "We got the tapes back from the company. Corporate wanted a full review," he said, voice thin and brittle. "They found something." I braced myself. Glenn sent a freeze frame from the original security footage. In the polished brass sconce where Maya's shadow had flickered, there was a shape, almost too faint to see, A smudge, a distortion that looked like a face screaming behind glass. I stared at it for a long time, my hand shaking. I still take cruise contracts from time to time, but I avoid Deck 9 on the Triumph. I never walk those hallways alone at night. Sometimes, late on quiet crossings, I'll hear a faint humming just out of earshot, and I'll remember the housekeeper's words. I'll think of that cold patch on the wall, and the way the footage skips from Maya's smiling face to empty air. People disappear for 1,000 reasons, but sometimes the reason is something no security camera can catch. I've been a maintenance supervisor for cruise liners almost 15 years. Seen every kind of leak, short circuit, and human mess you can imagine. But I still have nightmares about what we found on the Pacific Serenade, buried behind a wall in Storage B. If you've ever wondered why ship crews avoid certain hallways after hours, let me tell you what really happened. Maybe then you'll understand. This was back in March 2023. We just pulled out of Vancouver, 5 days to Honolulu. The Pacific Serenade was an older ship, late 90s build, lots of quirks and upgrades over the years. On the second day at sea, I got a work order about a weird smell in one of the midship storage rooms. Mold, maybe, or a dead rat in the ducts. No big deal. I grabbed 2 of my guys, Mario and Eli, and headed below Deck 5. The storage rooms were rarely used, kept mostly for overflow supplies. Harsh fluorescent lights, metal racks full of dusty plastic bins, the air always a little damp, a chemical tang like cleaning fluid and rust. This room, though, smelled different. I remember walking in and wrinkling my nose, a dense, sweet rot under the bleach, sharp enough to sting my eyes. We started moving crates, looking for any sign of leakage or rodent droppings, but nothing stood out. Mario traced the smell to the back wall, where a rack of emergency blankets was stacked tight against the paneling. "It's stronger here," he muttered, shining his phone flashlight along the baseboard. That's when we noticed it. A faint vertical seam, not quite lined up with the rest of the wall. The paint was a shade off, newer than the surrounding panels. There was no door, no latch, just this line running from floor to ceiling, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. Eli knocked on the panel and we all heard it. A hollow thump, different from the solid sound of the other walls. My stomach tightened. We checked the old blueprints on my tablet. Nothing showed a crawl space or maintenance hatch behind that spot. Ships get patched, rewired, fixed by whoever's on duty, but a sealed wall with no record. That was unusual. "Should we open it?" Mario asked, trying to sound casual. I nodded, already uneasy. We pried the panel loose with a crowbar. Dust fell out first, gray and fine, clinging to our hands. The space behind was pitch black and narrow, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. A dry, fetid rush of air spilled out, so strong I gagged. Something old and wrong had been trapped in there a long time. I shone my flashlight inside. The beam caught on something blue and shiny. At first I thought it was a tarp, but as I leaned closer I saw a sleeve. Then a patch white with the ship's logo frayed around the edges. A uniform. Someone was crouched, knees up to their chest, pressed into the far corner of the crawl space. Mario swore, backing away so fast he knocked over a crate. Eli just stared, mouth open, frozen in place. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The figure was wearing an old-style crew uniform. Blue shirt, black slacks, faded gold stripes on the shoulder. What hit me hardest was the ID tag clipped to the shirt pocket, coated in dust, but with a name I could just barely make out. R. Delgado. I remembered the name. About 12 years ago, the Serenade's log showed a junior steward, Rafael Delgado, missing after a stormy night crossing the Bering Sea. The official story, he must have gone overboard. They said he'd been drinking, depressed, a likely accident. The file ended there. No one expected to ever see him again. I called security, then the captain. Protocol kicked in, a cordon, statement forms, all the usual chaos. They pulled Delgado out with gloved hands and plastic sheeting, but the crawl space was so tight it took nearly 2 hours. He'd been sealed in for more than a decade. I couldn't help staring at his face, skin tight over bone, mouth locked in a silent scream. His hands were still clutching a battered flashlight, long since dead. The smell in the room got worse, the longer the door stayed open. It settled in my clothes, my hair, my pores. News traveled fast. By the next morning, the entire crew was buzzing with rumors. Some said Delgado was murdered, walled up by someone with a grudge. Others whispered about ghost decks and bad luck, old superstitions that never quite leave ships like this. But the official report came down. No foul play, just accidental entombment during unauthorized repairs. But none of that explained the strangest detail. Delgado's watch. It was still strapped to his wrist, face cracked but readable. The time had frozen at 2:11 a.m., the exact hour. The captain later confirmed, when the Serenade had lost power during that storm 12 years ago. The ship had gone dark for 40 minutes, electrical systems dead, before they finally rebooted. Standing there in that storage room, surrounded by peeling paint and the stink of old death, I found myself wondering what really happened that night. Why had someone gone to the trouble of sealing a wall so carefully, with no record in any work order or log? Why would Delgado have crawled into a space with no exit, flashlight and watch in hand, never calling for help loud enough for anyone to hear? The official investigation wrapped up in less than a week, but nothing about it sat right with me. The report said accidental death, case closed, no one to blame. The authorities flew Delgado's remains back to his family in Manila, and the company sent a new round of PR emails promising heightened safety standards. But for those of us who worked below decks, there were questions no one wanted to ask out loud. A few days after the discovery, I started combing through the ship's old maintenance logs on my own. I found something odd. Entries for emergency repairs and structural paneling in Storage B, all dated within 24 hours after that infamous blackout. The entries were signed with a badge number I didn't recognize, and the handwriting was different from every other supervisor on record. I showed them to the new chief engineer, but he just shrugged. Probably a temp. Could have been a rushed fix. Old ships are full of bad paperwork. Maybe. But sometimes late at night I'd remember the look on Delgado's face, mouth stretched wide, not just in pain but in pure terror. I started dreaming about the crawl space. In the dreams, I'm the one inside, clawing at the walls as the air gets thinner, hearing footsteps on the other side. Always, there's the sound of someone humming just out of sight, a tune I can never quite place, always getting louder the closer I get to waking up. The rest of the crew felt it too. Eli stopped coming down to Storage B altogether, refusing even to pass the door. Mario transferred off the Serenade at the next port, citing family issues but not meeting my eye as he said goodbye. The other stewards started leaving small offerings, a coin, a folded note, a piece of candy, by the wall where we'd found Delgado. They said it was a Filipino custom for restless spirits. I didn't argue. There was one detail I never reported, one I can't prove, but that haunts me all the same. The night after the body was found, I came down to Storage Ball alone. I don't even remember why. The room was dark, lights humming faintly overhead. As I walked past the wall, I felt a cold breeze against my face, a draft, though there were no vents open. It carried a scent, not just of death, but of old cologne, cheap and floral, like someone getting ready for their shift. For a moment I heard the soft tap of footsteps in the crawl space behind the panel, and something that sounded like a desperate whisper, "Please help." I stumbled out, slamming the door behind me. I waited in the corridor, breathing hard, the echo of that voice lingering in my head. When I finally got the courage to look again, everything was silent. The room felt empty, just as it always had, but I never set foot in Storage B alone after that. As the weeks passed, life on the ship settled back into routine, but that part of Deck 5 stayed quiet. Even now, months later, new hires swap stories about the walled-up crewmen and dare each other to spend a shift down there alone. Most laugh it off, but every now and then, someone comes up to me with wide eyes and asks if it's true. I tell them what I saw. I tell them not to ignore the cold spots, or the sounds behind the wall. And I tell them that on ships this old, there are always places that remember. We never found out who sealed that crawl space. Maybe it was an accident, an oversight during a blackout, a worker in a hurry not realizing someone was inside. Or maybe someone wanted Delgado to disappear, to become part of the ship's bones, a secret locked away until rust and time forced him back into the light. I'll never know for sure. All I do know is this: when you work at sea, you learn to respect the spaces no one talks about. You learn that some doors are better left unopened. The Pacific Serenade is still out there, running her same routes, her same ghostly halls. But for me, the ship will always be haunted, not by rumors, not by superstition, but by the reality of what we found behind that wall. A reminder that not every disappearance is an accident, and not every secret stays buried forever. If you've ever worked night shift on a cruise ship, you know the feeling, how the world gets smaller after midnight, how the halls seem to close in with every echoing footstep. I was a night steward on the Ocean Monarch last spring, 6 weeks into a contract that was already starting to feel endless. Most nights blurred together in a haze of fluorescent lights and chemical cleaner, but what happened in cabin 511 will never leave me. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I hear the announcement all over again. That night started off like any other. We'd left Nassau 2 days earlier, headed north for Charleston. Weather was decent, foggy, but nothing out of the ordinary for April in the Atlantic. I was restocking towels around 1:30 a.m., on deck 5, keeping an eye on the clock and counting down the minutes until my break. The ship felt strangely empty. Even the bar crowd had thinned out early, leaving behind only the muffled hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. By 2 a.m., the corridors were dead quiet. You get used to the sounds of a ship at night, the distant laughter, the hush of water pipes, the occasional thump from a neighboring room. That night, though, everything felt sharper, like my senses were dialed up a notch, every creak and groan amplified in the hush. I remember pausing by a window to check the weather, my breath fogging the glass. Dense mist pressed against the outer decks, so thick you couldn't see the lifeboats. The sea and sky blended together in a wall of gray. At 2:17, as I was tucking a pile of hand towels into the cart, the intercom crackled. It was that staticky, hollow sound the system always made before a real announcement. I stopped moving, instinctively bracing for the usual late-night message, some drunken passenger asking for assistance, maybe a code for lost property. Instead, a voice I didn't recognize, flat, neither male nor female, with a rasp like someone speaking through a bad phone line, cut through the silence. "Do not go outside." That was it. Just those 4 words. Nothing else. No cabin number. No explanation. No closing chime. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. But then I heard the squeak of a door down the hall. Cabin 511, a middle-aged couple, the Gutierrezes, stepped out in their pajamas, the husband rubbing his eyes. He looked at me, eyebrows drawn together. "Did you just hear that?" he asked, voice low and uncertain. Before I could answer, other doors began to open. People poked their heads out, whispering to each other. I heard snippets. "Did you hear it too? Was that the captain? Is there a fire?" The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm hits. Someone down the corridor called out, half joking, "Is this a prank?" I grabbed my radio and called the bridge. "Security, this is Deck 5. Was there just an announcement?" Static. Then a bored-sounding officer replied, "Negative. Deck 5. No announcement scheduled." I pressed, telling him what I'd heard, but he only repeated himself, annoyed. "No one's touched the intercom since 11 p.m. If you've got pranksters, let us know." A tight knot formed in my stomach. The Gutierrezes went back inside, but I lingered in the hallway, listening. For a moment, the silence felt absolute, like the whole ship was holding its breath. Then, faintly, I heard hurried footsteps above me, somewhere on Deck 6. I followed them, cart abandoned, shoes squeaking on the waxed floor. At the main staircase, I ran into Maddie, another night steward. She looked pale, clutching her phone. "You heard it too?" she whispered, voice trembling. I nodded. My phone SEP's blowing up. Passengers are texting the front desk. Nobody knows what SEP's happening. They SEP saying, "The captain told everyone to stay inside," but the bridge denies it. Down the hallway, the security guard, Curtis, was already fielding complaints. He waved me over, voice low. "Got at least 30 calls so far. Every deck, all at the same time." He looked spooked, which I'd never seen before. "Captain's in his quarters. He says the PA logs are clean. No message. No one accessed the system." I tried to shake it off. Ships are full of glitches, odd noises, Pennsylvania malfunctions, rumors that spread like wildfire. But something about that voice stuck with me. It wasn't any crew member I knew, not the polished tone the officers use, not the casual banter of entertainment staff. It was flat, mechanical, somehow urgent and empty at once. The rest of the night crawled by. No one went out on deck, not that I saw. Anyway, even the heavy drinkers stayed in, curtains drawn tight, TV sets flickering through the cabin windows. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the glass until I couldn't tell if dawn had come or not. When my shift ended at 5, I passed the bridge. The captain stood in the doorway, arms crossed, talking quietly with two officers. He shot me a look, equal parts irritation and something colder like suspicion. "You were on deck 5, he asked. I nodded. He frowned, rubbing his forehead. "We've checked the system. No record. It's impossible for a message to go out like that. I don't want anyone causing panic over a technical glitch." "Understood." By the next evening, the whole ship was buzzing. The late-night announcement had turned into a rumor wildfire. Some passengers insisted it was a warning about pirates or a fire. Others whispered about bomb threats or medical emergencies. But no alarms had sounded. No one had seen anything out of place. The weather had cleared, but still, no one wanted to linger by the outer decks. At breakfast, I overheard an older woman at table 19 telling her husband, "I checked my phone. It was 2:17 on the dot." I heard it as clear as anything. It sounded wrong. Others nodded, voices low, sharing details that matched mine. The rasp of static, the way the voice seemed to echo through the walls. Some said it felt like it spoke directly into their rooms, even though the speakers were off. It didn't make sense. A technician from engineering, Stan, found me after lunch. He looked jumpy, carrying a battered laptop. "I checked the PA logs myself," he said. "No system access, no power surge, nothing. But the weird part, on the audio trace there's a blip at exactly 2:17 a.m. Just enough to trigger the system, but not long enough to be a real file. It's like it came from inside the network, not from the console." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "You ever hear of something called a ghost in the system?" I tried to laugh, but it came out dry. "Shipsits full of ghosts, San. Most of them just wear uniforms." But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the fog, the empty decks, the flat voice. I replayed the announcement over and over in my head, trying to place where I'd heard anything like it, around 3 a.m. I gave up and went to the promenade deck, figuring the fresh air might help. The hallways were silent, carpets muffling my footsteps. As I passed the emergency exit, I caught a faint smell, sea air mixed with something metallic, almost like old blood. The outside door was locked, but I could see the fog pressing up against the glass. My reflection was warped, barely visible. Then, just behind me, a soft crackle like the intercom warming up again. I spun around, heart thumping, but the speaker above the door was silent. No one else was there. Suddenly, from down the hall, I heard a child's voice, a quick, urgent whisper, "Don't go outside." I jerked, backing away from the door. The voice was gone as quickly as it came. I stood there for a long minute, trying to convince myself I was just tired imagining things, but my hands shook the rest of the night. Later, talking to other stewards, I learned I wasn't alone. Maddie had heard a second message, fainter this time, almost a whisper, while cleaning deck 7. Curtis, the guard, said he'd been patrolling the pool deck and found wet footprints leading from the lifeboat station to the bar, though no one had been outside since midnight. Even the captain started to look frayed, snappish at breakfast briefings, snapping at the mention of announcements or technical issues. 2 days before we docked in Charleston, a passenger, Mr. Gutierrez, the same man from cabin 511, approached me quietly as I refilled his coffee. "My wife's convinced the ship was wrong that night," he murmured. "She swears she heard someone crying in the hallway after the message, like a child, lost in the fog." "You hear anything?" I shook my head, but I couldn't yet meet his eyes. The ship finally made port under cloudy skies. The captain held a meeting, reiterating that there had been no emergency and urging everyone not to spread rumors. But when the passengers left, there was a tension, a quiet urgency, like they couldn't get off the Ocean Monarch fast enough. I watched them go, luggage rattling on the gangway, eyes darting over their shoulders at the ship's empty decks. I still work on cruise ships. Sometimes I'll pass a PA speaker late at night and feel my stomach tighten, half expecting to hear that voice again. I never mention it to the new crew, but I pay attention to the clocks, and if I'm awake at 2:17 a.m., I stay away from the outer decks. They say ships remember what happens on them, that metal holds memories, and that sometimes echoes bleed through the wires, repeating warnings no one can trace. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe what I heard. I never wanted to be the kind of person who believes in ghosts, but after what happened during my contract on the Starward Dream, I can't pretend anymore. I was part of the entertainment crew, backstage manager, mostly wrangling props and keeping the dancers on schedule. The showgirls, the magicians, the singers, they're all real people under the makeup, or at least that's what I used to think. It started midway through our 2-week Bahamas loop last summer. The Dream was famous for its nightly fever in Havana. Review, a mashup of salsa, jazz, sequins, and too much cheap cologne. Full house every night. Our star was a dancer named Elena Morales. If you ever saw her, you'd remember tall, athletic, wild curly hair she pinned back with a red flower every show. She was electric, the kind of performer who made every passenger believe the cruise was worth every penny. Elena was the best of us, but she was also intense. First in, last out, always rehearsing, always pushing everyone harder. She joked that she danced to outrun the ghosts of her own past. I never pried. The accident happened during a rehearsal 3 days out of Nassau. I wasn't even in the theater when it started, just running late with a box of new feather fans. I heard the crash from the hallway. I ran in, barely dodging the stage tech swarming the boards. Elena was on the floor, twisted at an angle that didn't look right, a dark pool spreading beneath her head. Her eyes were open but unfocused, fixed on the golden lights overhead. I'll never forget the silence that followed, how even the sound system cut out. The paramedics came fast, but it was over before they arrived. They hustled us out, locked the doors, called the captain. Later, the official statement said sudden cardiac event, not a fall, not trauma. We all knew what we saw though. But the ship didn't forget, neither did we. The first time someone saw her was 2 nights later. We'd all been called back for an emergency rehearsal with a stand-in dancer slotted in to fill the lead. The band started up, the lights washed the stage in neon blue, and halfway through the opening number someone gasped. I was in the wings, clipboard in hand, running lines with the MC. Out on the stage, under the glare of the spotlights, I saw a flash of red, Elena's trademark flower, pinned in dark curls. Just for a second. The rest of the cast kept dancing, but the audience was murmuring, pointing toward stage left. Afterward, the stand-in, Sasha, came to me, white as a sheet. I swear to God I saw her in the wings. Elena. She was smiling at me. I thought I'd lose my footing. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was nerves, an echo of memory, but I didn't believe it. Not really. Word spread through the crew. Elena was still on board. The band leader said he'd heard her humming in the empty theater after midnight, practicing the same routine over and over. The lighting techs swore their boards flickered and shorted out every time they tried to run the finale, the one Elena had always closed. Passengers began to notice too. It fielded complaint after complaint at the hospitality desk. We saw an extra dancer last night, the tall one with the flower. Why wasn't she in the program? Another said they met her by the pool after hours, in costume, practicing steps. One couple even claimed she knocked on their cabin door, inviting them to a special show that wasn't on the schedule. By the end of the week, the dancers refused to rehearse alone. The sound of soft footsteps echoed from the empty stage when no one was there. A cold patch settled in Elena's corner of the dressing room. No matter how hot the ship got, I started dreading late-night checks, heart pounding whenever I passed the closed doors of the theater, afraid I'd see her silhouette in the flickering footlights. One night, after another round of passenger reports, I decided to see for myself. The ship was silent. The sea as flat as glass, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I crept into the dark theater just before midnight, flashlight in hand. The velvet seats glowed faintly in the emergency exit lights. On the stage, a soft swish, bare feet sliding over polished wood. I held my breath and stayed in the shadows near the orchestra pit. The stage was empty, or should have been. But then from stage right she appeared. Elena, the red flower bright against her hair, the sequin dress shimmering in the faint spill of safety lights. Her face was peaceful, almost radiant, her eyes wide with the same wild energy she always had in life. She danced as if nothing had changed. Slow turns, arms arched, hips swaying to music only she could hear. The theater was silent, but I could swear, for a moment, that I heard the distant pulse of congas and trumpets, the low buzz of an audience holding its breath. Elena spun toward me, graceful, focused, her eyes catching mine in the darkness. She smiled. It wasn't a grimace or a trick of the light. She smiled as if she saw me, as if she knew I was there watching her. Then the air shifted. I felt a chill at my back, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. The hair on my arms stood up. My breath came out in a cloud, right there in the middle of a Caribbean cruise ship. The ship creaked, a soft groan running through the walls, and the lights above the stage flickered. Elena's image began to fade, her movements slowing, the edges of her form blurring into the shadows. Her smile never left her face. The lights went out for a split second. When they flicked back on, she was gone. The stage was empty, just the faint echo of bare feet on wood, and for a heartbeat, the scent of her perfume, something spicy and sweet, hung in the air. I stood there, stunned, until the house lights snapped on. The spell was broken. I heard voices in the hallway, some of the late-night cleaning crew, laughing, unaware of what had just happened. I backed out quietly, pulse pounding, my mind racing with questions and doubts I couldn't shake. After that night, the sightings only grew. Passengers reported seeing Elena dancing in the reflection lounge, smiling from behind closed doors, or drifting through the corridors in full costume, her feet never quite touching the floor. Sometimes people would return to their cabins and find red flower petals on their pillows, or faint smudges of glitter on their doorknobs. One elderly guest claimed she'd seen Elena's face in the reflection of her cabin window, waving from the darkness as the sea rolled past. The entertainment staff stopped talking about her directly. Some left early, breaking their contracts, unwilling to spend another night on the dream. The new lead dancer refused to wear the red flower, even when the costume supervisor insisted. The band played softer now, and no one stayed alone in the theater after shows. The captain eventually issued a quiet memo: no unauthorized rehearsals after midnight. The theater doors were to remain locked except during official performances. But I knew it wasn't going to help. The ship felt different now. Heavier, quieter, waiting, like it was holding its breath for the next curtain call. I finished out my contract, but I never set foot in the theater alone again. Sometimes walking the crew corridors late at night, I'd hear the faint sound of music coming from behind closed doors, Elena's number, always just out of reach. Once as I passed by the empty dance studio, I saw a single red flower lying in the middle of the floor. I left it there, unable to touch it. When I left the Starward Dream, I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it all, that the stress, the late hours, the tragedy had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. And every so often, I'll catch a whiff of that spicy perfume, or see a flash of red on the edge of a crowd, and the memories come flooding back. You don't really think about lifeboats on a cruise ship until something goes wrong. For most people, they're background noise, part of the safety drill, maybe a passing thought when you glance over the rail and see them swinging above the waves. But for me, after what happened on the Celestial Dawn, they're all I see. I was an assistant deck officer on that ship, working the night shift graveyard hours, when everything feels just a little too quiet and you can hear the sea breathing below. It was late September, the last Caribbean run of the season, the kind of night you dream about if you love the ocean. Humid, still, a thin fog hugging the water just beyond the floodlights. My shift started at midnight. I'd done a walkthrough with security, double-checked the mooring lines, and stopped for a cup of coffee on deck 5 before heading up to the bridge. I remember the way the world felt muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over the ship. Around 4:30 a.m., I was reviewing logs with Anders, the watch officer, when a soft, insistent beeping broke the silence. It was coming from the security panel, a lifeboat alert. We both frowned. The system said Lifeboat 7 had been lowered. No authorization, no crew report. That should have been impossible. There are protocols, double keys, sign-offs required from the bridge. But there it was, red indicator. Position shifting slightly on the screen, bobbing maybe 30 meters from starboard midship. Anders looked at me, a knot tightening in his jaw. "Go check it out," he said, grabbing the radio. "Take Ramos with you, and stay sharp." Ramos was waiting by the security office, half awake but alert. We jogged to the launch area, radios crackling quietly in the background. The air was thick and salty, carrying the kind of wet cold that seeps through your jacket. We reached the rail, peering down into the dim gray of pre-dawn. There it was, Lifeboat 7, rocking gently, tethered by a single thick line, paint flashing dull orange against the steel hull. It looked wrong, like it shouldn't be there at all. We lowered the access ladder, the steps slick with dew. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the faint slosh of water against fiberglass. I climbed down first, flashlight sweeping across the empty interior, but it wasn't empty. Not really. Wet footprints, dozens of them, covered the floor, leading from the aft bench to the forward hatch and circling back again. They were oddly small, as if made by bare feet, toes splayed wide, the prints crisp in the sheen of water. Some were smudged, as if someone had slipped or turned quickly. I touched one, half expecting it to be warm, but it was icy cold. Ramos joined me, eyes wide. "Anyone there?" he called, voice cracking in the stillness. Nothing. No response, no sign of life. But the air felt crowded, thick with the sharp, sour smell of seawater, and something else, something like mildew and copper. We searched every inch. The life jackets were all in place. The supply locker was locked tight. There was no sign of an intruder, no tools left behind. The emergency radio was untouched, the batteries fresh. The only thing out of place was the footprints, pooling water gathering in the grooves of the deck. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast, echoing against the fiberglass walls. I climbed back up and called the bridge. Lifeboat 7 recovered, no one on board, just wet footprints, everywhere. Anderset's voice was tight. "Bring it up. Don't let anyone else near it until security gets there." We secured the boat and watched as it was hoisted back into place. The sun was just starting to break through the mist, casting a sickly gold light over the ship. Crew gathered, murmuring, craning their necks to see. No one wanted to get too close. By the time security arrived, the footprints had started to dry, fading into pale outlines. The team swept for prints, checked for salt residue, even took swabs for DNA. Nothing. No match, no sign anyone had ever been inside. The investigation went nowhere. Security combed through hours of camera footage. No one seen approaching Lifeboat 7. No one on deck between 2 o'clock and 4:30 a.m. The release mechanism was intact, safety pins in place. It was like the boat had lowered itself into the water and come back up with only ghosts aboard. But the crew started to talk. Ramos claimed he heard a faint splash as we brought the boat in, like someone slipping away under the hull. Another steward said he found a child's handprint on the outside of his porthole that same morning, though there were no children booked on our deck. Maintenance guys refused to work the starboard lifeboats after midnight. I didn't sleep well for the rest of the voyage. Sometimes I'd walk past Lifeboat 7 in the early hours and feel a cold draft, even with the tropical air pressing in. Once I thought I saw wet footprints again, trailing from the lifeboat's hull across the deck, only to vanish before I could follow them. When the ship finally docked, I was one of the first off. I haven't worked nights at sea since. Some say it was just a prank, condensation, or the ocean playing tricks, but I know what I saw. Sometimes, out on the water, things come aboard that were never meant to leave the sea. I started working cruise ships right out of college. Easy money, decent food, endless ocean. You get used to the weird hours and the weirder stories. But what happened on the Silver Halcyon during my second contract still keeps me up at night. I've never used a ship's elevator since. It was the 5th day of a week-long Atlantic crossing, mid-March, with heavy swells and thick fog outside. I was a junior guest services rep, basically running errands, answering dumb questions and guiding lost tourists back to their rooms after too many margaritas. The Halcyon was an older ship, all retro brass and faded carpet, but she had a certain charm. Everyone said so, even as things on board started to feel off. It began with elevator complaints. First it was just a couple from Deck 8, swearing the lift stopped on the wrong floor. Then a bartender who insisted he'd spend 5 minutes in limbo when the doors stuck and the lights flickered out. I chalked it up to nerves and maybe a little seasickness. But then one night it happened to me. I'd worked a late shift, closing the hospitality desk after midnight, when I got a text from security. Someone had left a backpack in the Sky Lounge. The quickest way up was the forward elevator. I pressed the button, humming to myself, barely awake. When the doors slid open, the car was empty except for a faint smell of mildew, like wet paper and rust. I pressed for Deck 11. The elevator hummed, jerked, and started its slow crawl upward. For the first few seconds, all was normal. The overhead panel blinked 2, 3, 4, but then the lights dimmed, and the car shuddered hard enough to make my teeth clack. The numbers flickered, 6, 7, then dropped suddenly to 0. Deck 0. I stared at the panel, confused. There was no Deck 0. It was an old legend among crew, a sealed floor, a leftover from the ship's retrofitting years ago. Some said it was once the medical bay, others a crew rec room, long since walled off. I figured it was just a quirk of the wiring, until the doors slid open. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting my nose. The lights overhead flickered, throwing the hallway beyond into a patchwork of blue and shadow. The carpet was different here, threadbare, stained, patterned with faded geometric shapes. I heard nothing, no voices, no music, just the hum of the ship far below. Even the ever-present vibration of the engines felt distant, dulled. I should have stayed put, but curiosity, or maybe something else, pulled me out. My phone said no service. The air was wrong, heavy and damp, colder than anywhere else on the ship. The corridor stretched out in both directions, doors on either side, all closed, numbers missing from the plaques. There was a smell too, like old cleaning fluid, salty metal, and something earthy, almost like turned soil. I walked a few steps, shoes echoing. The lights at the far end of the hall blinked once, twice, then snapped off, leaving only the weak glow behind me. I saw what looked like a handprint smeared on the wall, rust brown, half faded. My mouth went dry. I turned to head back. The elevator doors stood open, but the car inside was pitch dark now, as if the light had been swallowed up. I hesitated, then hurried in. The moment I pressed the button for deck 11, nothing happened. I hit it again, frantic. The doors stayed open, and the hallway stretched out behind me, silent. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps, padding slowly along the carpet, too slow, too measured to be a guest. I caught a glimpse, just a flicker in the shadows of someone moving, barefoot, wearing what looked like an old steward's uniform, the kind you only see in archive photos. He stopped at the far end, eyes catching the faint light, and smiled. His lips were dark, teeth too white, grin too wide. He lifted one finger to his mouth. Shay, and the lights blinked out. For a moment, I thought I felt icy fingers brush my neck. I mashed the door close button again and again. This time, mercifully, the doors slid shut, leaving me in total darkness. The car lurched, dropped, then shot upward with a jolt that slammed me against the rail. When the doors opened again, I was on deck 11. Warm, normal air. Voices. Music drifting from the Sky Lounge. My phone buzzed. Service restored. I staggered out, legs shaking. I checked my watch. I'd only been gone 5 minutes, but my shirt was damp with sweat, and my fingers were numb from cold. I reported the elevator malfunction to maintenance. They just nodded, eyes haunted. Deck 0, huh? One said. You Sutter not the first. I told them what I Sutter'd seen, and the older guys went quiet. One finally muttered, there was a fire years ago. Crew quarters. Some never made it out. The captain had the elevator locked off that night for inspection, but the stories kept coming. Passengers and crew who vanished for minutes at a time, returning pale and shivering, always talking about Deck 0. Eventually, the forward elevator was decommissioned for repairs. No explanation, no reopening. I finished my contract, but every time I pass an elevator, even on land, I feel a rush of cold air, a phantom touch on my neck. I always take the stairs now. I didn't believe in haunted rooms. Not until cabin 428 on the Meridian Blue. Back then, I was a new hire, fresh out of hospitality school, bright-eyed, eager, the sort who volunteered for extra shifts just to prove myself. The Meridian Blue ran 7-day Caribbean routes, a mid-tier ship with outdated carpets but 5-star customer complaints. They'd just promoted me to guest relations, which mostly meant smoothing over problems and escorting guests to their cabins. I was the guy with the smile and the master key. Cabin 428 was tucked at the end of the portside corridor, sandwiched between the laundry chute and a storage closet. From the outside, it looked ordinary. If anything, it was a little nicer than the average ocean view. New bedding, a flat screen, fresh paint. Still, every time a guest was assigned to 428, I'd notice an odd chill hanging in the air, even in July. The hallway felt muffled, quieter than the rest of the deck. I never thought much of it until the week of the Pearson family. They boarded mid-afternoon, flustered from a flight delay, 2 kids in tow, arms full of pool noodles and half-sipped bags. I remember Mrs. Pearson's smile, tight, a little forced. "Room 428, please," she said, and I led them down the corridor, my key ready. The air felt even colder than usual. I blamed the AC. That first night I worked late and noticed the light under 428's door long after the rest of the hall was dark. At 1 a.m., the front desk called, "Pearsons need assistance." I hurried down and found Mr. Pearson in the hallway, face gray, clutching his robe tight. "There's someone in the room," he whispered, voice raw. "We keep hearing movement, shuffling, whispering. My wife says she saw a shadow in the mirror. The kids are crying. Can you please check?" I scanned my key and stepped inside. The room felt like a refrigerator. Both kids were bundled on the bed, eyes wide, staring at the bathroom door. Mrs. Pearson sat beside them, hands trembling. "Did you check the bathroom?" I asked gently. She nodded. It was empty, but the shower curtain keeps moving. In the closet door, it opened by itself. I closed it twice. I walked over and pulled the closet door open. Nothing, just their suitcases, neat and zipped. Still, the hairs on my arms stood up. I tried to brush it off. Sometimes the air system pulls doors open. These old ships, you know. But as I spoke, I heard it, a faint, wet shuffling like bare feet on linoleum, coming from the bathroom. I flicked on the light and found nothing. The curtain hung still, but I caught a whiff of seawater, sharp and cold. I apologized, promising to send up extra blankets. The Pearsons didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, they were at the desk, requesting a transfer. "Please, Mrs. Pearson said. Anywhere but 428. It wasn't set the first time. In my 6 months on Meridian Blue, every guest in 428 demanded to be moved by the second night. Some didn't even last that long. An elderly couple said they woke to a woman standing by the window, combing her hair, her back to the bed. A honeymooner claimed icy hands brushed his feet under the covers. One single traveler locked herself in the bathroom until security came, insisting she heard a child sobbing in the dark. Housekeeping staff hated cleaning 428. Rosa, who worked ships longer than I, been alive, refused to go in alone. "She doesn't sit like us moving her things," she whispered, crossing herself. "You see." It got so bad that the manager tried everything, sage, priests, even a company-mandated deep clean. Nothing changed. The room always felt cold, the lights flickered, and guests kept fleeing. But I didn't truly understand until the night I was asked to sleep there myself. It was a full sailing, and the only spare berth was in 428. Just one night, the chief said, grinning, "You're not scared, are you?" I forced a laugh and tossed my bag on the bed, telling myself it was all nerves and suggestion. It started small. My phone wouldn't charge, the screen stuck on a pale static. My watch ran slow. At midnight, as I tried to drift off, the room temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. I heard soft footsteps in the bathroom. Water dripping, though no tap was running. I tried the lamp. The bulb buzzed, then went out. Then in the reflection of the window, I saw her, a faint shape, hair hanging long and wet, head bowed as if weeping. She stood between me and the closet, unmoving. I sat up, heart pounding. The air pressed down on me, thick and salty. She lifted her head, face in shadow, and the closet door creaked open behind her. I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. I spent the rest of the night in the staff lounge, lights on, shivering despite the heat. The next morning, I asked to be reassigned. No one teased me. They just nodded. A week later, cabin 428 vanished from the booking system. Management blamed a plumbing issue, but everyone knew the truth. Now the door stays locked. The porthole always shuttered. Guests walk a little faster down that corridor. Sometimes when I pass 428 on a late shift, I hear quiet sobbing or the faint scrape of hair against glass. I never linger. I never wanted to work cruise ships, but after the layoffs in 2020, I took what I could get, signing on as an assistant excursion guide for the Cormorant Spring Circuit down the Mexican coast. I'm no stranger to the water, but nothing prepares you for the weirdness that brews at sea. I saw things on that ship I'll never be able to explain. Most of it, what happened with Dax in the dive, still keeps me up at night. Dax was one of ours, a PADI-certified diver out of Oregon. He'd been running the Isla Rosario wreck tours for years. Local legend, the kind of guy who could tell if you were equalizing just by looking at you. His usual partner was Luis, a younger instructor who idolized him. The two of them knew every reef, every hull, every current that could snag a fin. The excursion that day was full. 4 guests, perfect weather, clear turquoise water. I stayed on the Zodiac, logging gear and waiting for radio check-ins. Everything was routine until about 2:50 p.m. The water was glassy, sun glaring hard enough to sting your eyes. I saw Dax surface first, a little farther out than usual. He waved, signaled okay, and I started the engine to go pick him up. Behind him, maybe 10 meters back, I saw another shape break the surface, bigger, slower, moving in the wake. At first I figured it was Luis, or maybe one of the guests, but when I scanned the water, only Dax was there. The shape vanished in the foam. When I pulled him up, his mask was off, eyes red and squinting in the light. He looked different, paler maybe. Something about the way he held himself, shoulders rigid, as if he was bracing for a blow. "Where's Luis?" I asked. He didn't answer, just shook his head and spat salt water over the side. The guests came up next, chattering about sea turtles and a weird cold patch near the wreck. I did another scan, no sign of Luis, no bubbles, no gear. Dax just stood there, dripping, staring out at the horizon. I asked again, "Did you see him go up?" Dax's voice was flat, empty. "He's not coming back," he said. We searched. For an hour the other guides and I combed the cove. The captain radioed the harbor, called in the local search and rescue. By 6 p.m. they'd found Luis's dive knife near the hull, but nothing else. The mood was tense, everyone waiting for Dax to say something, anything. But he just kept repeating, "He's not coming back," as if it was all that mattered. That night the mood on the Cormorant was sour. The guests wanted answers. The staff whispered about riptides and caves. Dax disappeared to his cabin, a windowless box 2 decks down, and locked himself in. I tried to check on him around 10, but the door was deadbolted from the inside, no answer to my knocking. I figured he just needed to be alone. It wasn't until sunrise that things got strange. I was the one who found his cabin, still locked. No answer. Security came with the master key, but it wouldn't turn. The latch was stuck, jammed in a way I'd never seen. When maintenance finally forced it open, the cabin was empty. Dax's wetsuit was hanging from the hook, still damp. His bag sat open on the floor, wallet and phone, untouched. The porthole was sealed, screws rusty with age, no sign of tampering. It was as if he'd evaporated. The investigation went nowhere. The captain questioned everyone, even pulled the CCTV from the corridor. You can see Dax walk in, turn the deadbolt, and never leave. The hallway stayed empty all night, nobody out. Rumors spread fast. Some guests claimed they saw Dax on the promenade around 2 a.m., but he never answered when they called his name. One of the kitchen crew swore he saw 2 sets of wet footprints in the crew passageway, one set larger than the other, both disappearing at the end of the hall. The staff grew jumpy. No one wanted to dive the wreck for days. Later I went through the excursion logs, looking for mistakes. The last thing Luis wrote was, "Cold spot by the hull, felt like being watched." Dax's handwriting trailed off halfway through his own entry, the pen digging deep into the page as if he'd been startled. I couldn't shake the feeling he'd brought something back with him, something that didn't belong. I still think about that other shape I saw in the water, how it moved just behind Dax, never breaking the surface, never showing a face. If I close my eyes, I can picture it, long limbs, pale skin, hands reaching for the ladder. Sometimes, late at night, I hear a faint knock on my cabin door, like someone asking to come in from the cold. After the season ended, I left cruise work for good. The ocean doesn't feel the same anymore. Sometimes, when I'm walking by the shore alone, I get the sense I'm being watched from just below the surface. A presence, silent and patient, waiting for me to turn away.